We're going to start off very, very simple. We want to talk about what kind of wood you're going to use, what you're going to need to make the guitar, and you really do have two alternatives. You can get what we call a service kit. A service kit you can buy from Stuart McDonald or Luthier's Mercantile, one of many suppliers that supply them. And the hard part is done. The sides are bent, the neck is roughed out, and it'll give you a really good head start on putting your guitar together. And the second way is to just buy all of the individual pieces of wood and start from scratch. Now you're going to be watching me build a guitar from scratch. Nothing is going to be pre-serviced. I'm simply going to take the raw wood, build the guitar, and finally, hopefully, end up playing it. But the first thing we're going to talk about is taking a look at the service kit, again, that you can get at places like Stuart McDonald or www.stumac.com or Luthier's Mercantile International or www.lmii.com. So let's take a look at the neck first. The service neck from the service kits are roughed out. The Spanish heel is all carved, ready to go. Just a little bit of modification. The basic outline of the neck is finished. The slots and holes for the tuners are all done. We just have to smooth them out. And our overlay for the headstock is all done. All we have to do is design our own outline for the headstock. So this is the neck. When you get the top from the service kit, the top is going to come something like this. It won't have the rosette. It'll have the groove or the channel for the rosette already cut out. The sides or the two pieces of the top will be glued together already, and the rough outline will be cut out. The hole will also be cut out. You'll have to put the rosette in at a later point. The backside, now I already have a head start on this one because we were building this kit for somebody, but all of the braces we get individual and we glue them in place. So that's the top. And then we'll take a look at the back. The back is pretty much like the top. The back is going to come with the two pieces glued together. The rough outline is there. All we have to do is take the bracing, glue it in place, and the back is pretty much ready to go. The thickness of the back and top is not going to be perfect. We're going to have to thin both the top and the back, but we'll get into that when we start talking about them. The sides are pre-bent in the service kit. Now here's an example of two sides. They're already bent, ready to go. The one thing I will note is that we will have to trim both ends when we assemble a guitar, and you will have to trim the back, in other words, the outline for the back. The front, where the top attaches to, is all set. So with a service kit, we get the sides that are already bent. Next thing you're going to get in the service kit is going to be the fretboard. Fretboard is all slotted for the frets. The outline of the fretboard is not yet cut out. It's just simply square or rectangular. But all the slots for the frets are in place. So this is pretty much set to cut the outline, glue in place, and put the frets in. So that's a big help. Also, the service kit comes with a tail block. We'll have to actually shape this when we get around to it. We're also going to get in the kit kerfing, which is slotted wood that allows us to bend it in a direction, which is going to enable us to glue the kerfing to the inside of the side. And this area here is the area that the top is going to be glued against, as well as the back. So the kerfing allows us to connect the sides to the top, and we'll get into that later on. Service kit is also going to supply us with the tuners. You get a little package of tuners. We're going to get the fret wire. All we have to do is cut it, put it in place, and we're going to get a finished bridge. We're also going to get a bunch of extra things, little small things, but in general, the kit is ready to start assembling one step at a time. And again, in all the pieces, we'll have to do some finishing work. We'll have to glue them together. We're also going to get, in fact, blocks of wood that we're going to make our bracing from. And the bracing block has the grain going in this direction. And later on, we're going to find out that it's very important when we're talking about making the braces. So that's a service kit. Let's take a look at the non-service kit, or basically the things that we need to make the guitar, buying the pieces one at a time. These are the pieces that we're going to need to put the guitar together if we went out and bought them individually, or if we decided to buy a non-service kit from one of the suppliers. If you buy the non-service kit, everything comes with it. The first thing is going to be a big long piece of mahogany, and this is what we're going to make the neck out of. Also, we get a big giant block of mahogany. This is going to be the Spanish heel. We can either use a big giant block, or we can use individual pieces. So when we get into building the neck, we'll cover that real good. We're going to have our bracing material, and again, we'll have to cut the individual braces out of this based on the grain direction. We're going to get plenty of kerfing. In fact, the kerfing is going to come in a kit like this, and if we were to open this, we'd find a whole bunch of items. Okay. They glue it well. Usually they put a big piece of stick in there to keep everything straight. So we have the kerfing, and there should be 4 kerfing strips, 2 for the top, 2 for the back. This piece of wood here, okay, is very delicate. This piece of wood has the grain running in this direction. And on the back, where the 2 back pieces go together, this is going to cover that joint. The grain of the back is going this way, and the grain of this piece of wood is going in this direction. It's very, very delicate. If I were to go like that, I'd probably crack it. So you got to be careful with that. We're going to get 4 pieces of wood binding, and these are the binding strips that are going to go around the edges of the guitar. And when we get to that, we'll find out they actually do have a purpose other than making it look good. So we have the wood binding, and then we have some more binding that they throw into use. So we get a lot of little delicate pieces that you have to be very careful with. You're also going to get a block of rosewood, and this block of rosewood is what we're going to make the bridge out of. In addition to that, we're going to get 2 pieces of bone. We're going to get a sort of a fat, stubby piece of bone, and then we're going to get a longer, thin piece of bone. This is going to be the saddle. This is going to be the nut. So we'll have to make them ourselves. So let's clear us a little room here. Now the rosette is 1 piece. It's made out of wood. Somebody actually spent a lot of time gluing little tiny pieces of wood together to make this. The rosette will go in a channel that we're going to make in the top, right around the sound hole. We'll glue this in place, and then we'll use a scraper to flatten it out. So the rosette is a separate thing. We have the sides. The sides are book matched, and what we mean by book matched is if this were a solid piece of wood, and I were to saw it right down the middle, and then open it like I would a book, that's what we mean by book matched. So this is one edge, and this is another edge. They always go in the same direction. So we could say, if we split it, we could call this the bottom. So when we put it together, that would be the bottom. That would mean that the outside on one side here would match this side, book matched. So we get a book matched pair of sides, which will end up having the bend. The headstock, and if we go get our headstock from the service kit, we can see that the headstock is mahogany. We also have a darker overlay. This is rosewood that they glued in place. Now we're going to do the same thing on our neck that we're going to make from scratch. So basically what we're going to do is we're take this mahogany neck, we're going to glue this piece of white wood on it, then we're going to glue this piece of rosewood on it. Once it dries, then we're going to cut it out to match the outline of the headstock. And it's just simply a decorative thing, but in general it's very, very pretty once we do it correctly. Then we get to the bracing material, and here's the bracing material. Again, we have a nice piece of cedar for our what we call the bridge pad, and then we have more spruce bracing with the grain running in this direction, and we're going to cut this up for our bracing. Now when it comes to the fretboard, they're going to give us a piece of ebony, and all four sides of this ebony are not trued, so we're going to have to true them up even before we start worry about cutting any slots. We have to true the edges up, okay? The thickness is going to be a little on the thick side. Fortunately, we're building a classical guitar, which means that we don't have to go through all the work of building in a radius to the top of the fretboard. Fretboard is going to be absolutely flat, which makes it very easy to do. So that's the ebony for the fretboard. Then we have some more Spanish cedar for bracing. And we have our back. And our back is going to be book matched also. On our back, if we opened it like the book, we can see that the lower section matches, this one matches the section here. Basically what they did is they had one piece of wood, they cut it down the middle, and we open it up, it's book matched. So we assign one edge to be the bottom and one edge to be the top, and we keep them in that direction so the guitar looks good once we put it all together. And the last item is going to be the top. And the top, or tone wood, notice they've already drawn out the figure of the guitar. This is also book matched, so at one point it was a solid piece of wood. They split it down the middle. We open it up. They've already put the shape of the guitar. What we're going to have to do to both the top and the back is we're going to have to put it like this. Before we can glue it together, we're going to have to trim this edge on both pieces so they're perfectly flat, and I can hold them up to the light like this. I should be able to hold it up to the light and not see any gaps or not see any light coming through. So that's pretty easy to do. We'll be using a plane. The sides and back being rosewood in this case, and it could be mahogany, it could be whatever you wanted to make it out of. It's pretty durable. But the top, the tone wood for the top is very, very delicate. It's going to dent and nick very easily. So as you're putting all these pieces together, you want to try to keep this in a safe place. I usually put it on a shelf with something over it like wax paper, so if anything gets on it, it doesn't leave a stain. And we also get we need a little bag of some tiny things. And in that bag is going to be 2 pieces of rosewood. This is going to be for the heel, the bottom of the heel. If we looked at our service neck, this piece of rosewood is going to get glued right there. And we cut that out to match the shape of the heel. Then we have the long skinny piece of bone, which is going to be the saddle. The short stubby piece of bone, which is going to be the neck. This is either camel bone or water buffalo bone, one of the other. I tend to think of a lot of water buffaloes running around with no legs. And these little pieces are thin pieces of bone that we're going to use to decorate the top of the bridge, or the area around the bridge where the strings get looped through. So that's it. This is the pieces that we need in terms of wood and materials. Oh, the one thing I did forget was going to be, you will also get your fret wire with a non-service kit. The one thing that we're not going to get in a non-service kit is going to be the tuners. Now, you can spend anywhere from $50 to $400 for a set of tuners. You don't have to go crazy. You just want a good set of tuners for your first guitar. Don't worry about spending, $300 or $400 for a set of tuners. A set of tuners that cost 50 to 80 bucks is fine. Try not to get cheap tuners that have a lot of play as you turn them. That's only going to give you problems later on. That pretty much concludes what we're going to need to build a guitar in terms of the wood that we're going to need or the components in the kit that we're going to buy from a supplier. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at the hand tools that we're going to be using. And I'm going to divide this into 3 sections. The first thing I'm going to talk about are the typical everyday woodworking tools that you can get anywhere in a woodworking tool shop. We're going to need a couple of planes. Little block plane is going to be good. We're going to need jack plane. Okay, doesn't have to be new. None of these have to be new, just as long as they're sharp and they work good. This old jack plane is probably 60, 70 years old. Even has screws on the side, but it works great. I use it all the time. We're going to need a long smoothing plane or a triplane. Very important for doing the tops, and we'll get to that later on. And again, if anything that we're talking about that has a sharpened blade, like a plane, like a chisel, like a knife, we want to make sure that they're sharp before we use them. And test on a piece of scrap wood before you're using it on the actual wood that we're going to be using on the guitar. Always test on scrap wood. We're going to need an array of chisels. I like long paring chisels. They don't have to be really long ones. My preference. These are not new, as you can see. These have been around for a long time. These are just part of a group of chisels that I bought on eBay for 50 bucks. I got 20 chisels for $50. We're going to using a dogleg chisel is a great tool. These aren't cheap, but they work great on guitar building, just my preference. So if you can get a hold of at least a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch dogleg chisel, you'll find a lot of uses for it, especially when we get to the point that we're actually making the braces for the top and back. You're going to need an array of measuring equipment. A good ruler, a long 12-inch ruler is good. If you're working with classical guitars, one thing you got to remember is that a lot of the plans that you're going to get are going to be in millimeters, not necessarily in inches. So I try to look for measuring instruments that use both the metric system and the American Standard System. Part of my previous life was a foreign car mechanic, and I worked on Porsches and Alfa Romeos, and all of the measurements were in millimeters. And I find that millimeters is a lot more accurate when it comes to working with measuring instruments than the American system of measuring. So bone up on your metric system. And one of the problems with learning the metric system, let's see if I have one, is pick up a dime. This is a penny, but pick up a dime, hold it up, and as you're looking at it, the thickness of a worn dime is about 39 thousandths of an inch, which happens to be 1 millimeter. So 3 millimeters is the thickness of 3 dimes. Now that you've got something to reference what a millimeter is, you're going to find it a lot easier to work with. So 10 dimes would be the thickness of 10 millimeters, or just happens to be 1 centimeter. Another thing that we're going to need is a long 3-foot ruler, and this one has the metric system on one side, the American in standard on the other side. You're also going to need a good and accurate protractor, which is going to allow us to set some angles. We're going to use this when it comes to building the neck. Very important. You're going to need a couple of small right-angled squares. This is going to be very important when we're putting the sides on the guitar. and setting up the neck. Very important. And I also keep hanging around just a small ruler where I have inches on one side and I have the metric system on the other. Last but not least, I also have a caliper. My caliper, it's the one fancy thing that I allowed myself. My caliper measures in both the metric system and inches. So I can change from thousandths of an inch to millimeters, hundreds of millimeters, just by hitting one button. This is great for measuring the sides and checking our progress in terms of when we're using the plane, how much material that we're taking off. And I also have a little tiny square that I use quite frequently just for drawing lines on pieces of wood with a pencil. Also a plain old protractor like you'd find in a square that you'd use in a drafting class made out of plastic is a great tool to have lying around because we're always making marks and drawing things out on the wood. When it comes to cutting wood, you're going to need a good back saw. This particular one is from France. It has a very, very strong back, which means as I'm cutting, it's going to stay straight. And we're going to need a saw like this to make the neck. This is what we use to cut this, what we call the scarf joint. I also have a smaller tenon saw. And on a classical guitar, when we make the Spanish heel, we're going to need a little saw like this, again with a very strong back, which is going to allow us to make a straight cut without the blade wobbling. So a small back saw is going to be something to put on your Christmas shopping list. Then, pick these up in any woodworking shop. We're going to need a scraper. You don't need a big assortment of scrapers. You want one good cabinet scraper that is straight on both sides. Generally, when I set the scraper up before I sharpened it, I round off the edges. That way, it's not going to put me in a position where I'm digging into the top. And then I sharpen the scraper, which we'll go through later on. But a cabinet scraper is going to be very important in cleaning up the top and making sure it's smooth. So put cabinet scraper on your list. Pair dividers. I use small dividers. I use big dividers. And I use bigger dividers. Very important to have. When we get to making the neck, you're going to find out when you build a guitar, one of the things that you're going to do quite frequently is you're going to find a guitar that you enjoy playing, and you're going to say to yourself, well, I want to build that guitar. I like that neck. I like the profile of the neck. This is what I want my guitar to feel like. And so I use this wire form quite often. I can copy the shape of pretty much anything just by making the wires go straight, pushing this over the form, and then I can take that form and transfer it to a pattern, make the pattern so when I'm designing the neck, I can keep the same profile. So this wire profile gauge is an excellent tool, and you're going to be using it, especially if you have a guitar in mind that you want to emulate or copy. And you're going to need clamps. You're going to need tons of clamps. A lot of guitar builders use this type of clamp, which is made out of wood. I can clamp it on something, and then it has a toggle here, and it's clamped. Very good clamp. They make clamps with a short jaw like this. Then we have clamps. Oops. Then we have clamps with a longer jaw. And last but not least, we're going to need an assortment of cabinet making clamps like this made out of metal. And you're going to need a lot of clamps. Clamps, clamps, clamps. I would say this type of clamp, you need at least 20 clamps. I would say these type of clamps, you need at least 10, possibly more. And then we need spool clamps too, which I'll show you later on when we're putting the sides on the guitar. Now another thing that we can use is a machine surface as a straight edge. I tend to use just a very nice level gauge. This works wonderfully. I use this in two ways. I use this to check the surfaces that are level, and I also get sandpaper that has a sticky back to it. I can stick the sandpaper to it, and now I have a flat surface to sand something down with. So this is going to be very handy putting our guitar together. So the next thing we're going to take a look at are the specialized hand tools that we're going to run up against when we're putting our guitar together. And the first one that you can buy pretty much anywhere, it's not necessarily a guitar tool, but it's absolutely wonderful. It's called a Zona, Z-O-N-A saw. And it's just a little tiny hand saw, and it comes with a large blade, a small blade, and a very tiny blade. And this little saw is just absolutely wonderful for working on guitar, especially when you come to making fine cuts on the braces. So it's called the Zona saw. You can buy it at stumac.com, or you can buy it at Luthier's Mercantile, or practically any of the guitar supply places on the internet. Next thing we're going to take a look at are the tools that we're going to be needing for the frets. Now if we take a look at our little training aid right here, and yeah, I chopped up a guitar, no way to get around it. We're going to be using a saw to cut the individual slots for each fret. And the slot has to be in a perfect place at a perfect depth. So to do that, we've got a little saw that goes like this that we can set up. You can get this at stumac.com, Luthier's Mercantile, a lot of other places. This type of saw, we have individual stops. We can put our ebony piece in there, and we can cut the slot precisely with the correct depth and at the correct right angle. So this type of setup is what we're going to use for cutting the slots when we get to the ebony fretboard. Once we've got the slot cut out, we've got to make sure it's clean before we push the fret in. And we actually have this little slot cleaner. It has a nice little hook on it that we can put in and draw through the slot to clean out any material or debris that's in there before we actually press the fret wire in. Now the fret wire, this piece of wire, has a ridge with barbs on it on the back side. And I've actually machined it off here so you can see this ridge right here. This ridge presses in, so we actually have to, almost for lack of a better way to describe it, we have to force the fret wire in. And we use a special hammer to force the fret wire in. We have a brass end and we have a plastic end. You can also get a little brass hammer such as this, which is going to do the same type of thing. So we need a small hammer to knock the frets in. Once the frets are in, we need a special pair of cutters to actually snip the edges off. So we're going to use these special cutters to snip the edges off. And can I help you? You're in my way. This is Chintzia, our shop cat, and she's in charge of production. Okay, sweetie. Yeah, okay. Okay, take off. So we need these special pliers, and what they are is the very edge of the pliers is flat. So when we snip it off, it's going to snip off the fret wire very, very flat right next to the ebony fretboard. It's going to make it very easy to finish. Once we have all of these snipped off, we have to crown the top of the fret. See you later, baby. Okay. We have to crown the top of the fret, and for that, first we have a guard that goes over the fret. We don't want to damage the fretboard. Then we have a special chisel or special file, and it has two grits, fine and coarse, and this is rounded off. So when I put this over the fret, I can go like this, and I can actually round the fret off because we want our frets round. All right. We're going to be using this after we initially flatten the frets with a straight edge with sandpaper on it. Once I have that done, I need to shape the edge of the frets so that they're rounded off. And I do have some special files that, in conjunction with my my fret shield, I can sand off the edges. And basically what I do is I have two of these, and I bend one over like this. I bend it down and use that one for shaping the edges of the frets. So we have that. When we get to making the braces, what we're going to do for the braces is we have to shape the braces after we've glued the braces onto the back and top. And let me get the top. Hold on. So here we have our top with the braces on it. When I go to shape these braces, I'm going to use a very small plane. After we've got the brace glued to the top, we're going to take this plane and we're actually going to shave the plane down and create a profile. And then after we rough it out with the plane, then we're going to take some fine sandpaper and we're going to smooth that down. So the thumb plane is a very, very valuable little tool to have kicking around to work on guitars. When we make the hole and we cut out the sound hole channel for the rosette, we're going to need a special tool to do that. And the easy way to do it is we have this little tool right here, which has a very, very sharp cutter on it. I can locate my soundboard on a piece of workboard or a scrap piece of wood. I drill a small guide pilot hole right where the center of the sound hole is. I set my cutter to cut out the inside edge of the channel, and then I adjust this cutter to do the outside edge, and I'm going to rotate this cutter by hand. So I'm going to be setting the depth by moving the cutter up and down, and I'm going to be setting the width by moving this back and forth. I do that by hand. After I have both slots for the channel, then I'm going to use it very delicately. I'm going to use a chisel, and I'm going to chisel out the groove. This is soft wood. It's going to come out very, very easily. Once I've got the channel cut out, I'm going to use the same cutter. I'm going to bring the cutter in and use this to actually cut the sound hole. So everything is concentric. We also have another tool, and this is called the gremille, and this is based very similar to our sound hole cutter. And the gremille has a piece of metal that rubs up against the side of the guitar or the top of the guitar. It has a very fine and sharp cutter blade that I can move in and out, and it has this arbor that moves in and out. I'm going to use this to cut the initial groove around the edges of the guitar for the binding. Okay, if we took a look at a training aid, here we are. Okay, we can see that this binding that's right in there, we had to cut that groove out. So basically what this is going to do is we set that cutter to the right depth and the right distance out, and we just bear down and we come right around and we cut that out. Then we set it for the depth of the other edge of the binding, and we bring that around, and again we cut that groove out. Then we take a chisel and we chisel the whole thing out. This is the way they do it by hand, but we're also going to see a different way to do it where we're going to be using a router. Most of you are going to use a router. Much easier to do. So some other specialized tools that we'll be using is that when we go to drill the holes for the headstock for the tuners, we're going to need some sort of jig or fixture that is going to align the tools or align the holes perfectly. And this fixture right here aligns the holes. I'm also going to show you how we can do the same type of operation using an old guitar. We can actually use pieces from an old guitar, or we can actually make a fixture out of a piece of hardwood. So we'll see both ways how to do it. Going back to cutting our hole in the soundboard, we also have this very expensive fixture right here, which has two blades in it, has a pilot hole. I can put this in a drill press. I come down the exact amount and automatically with a drill press cut the slots, and all I have to use is a chisel to cut out the channel. I can also cut the sound hole out with this fixture. A very good tool. When we go to cut the slots in the nut slots for the strings are all different sizes. So we have a variety of very fine saws, each one so many thousandths of an inch thick, and each one is designed to cut the slots out or rough them in size when we're getting ready to make the nut. Once we've roughed out the slots with the saws, we have files that have different edges that are actually designed to smooth out and widen the slots in the nut. So these are perfect for making the nut and finishing off the slot size. When we get to working with bending the sides, a good but inexpensive temperature gauge is going to be very important. We're going to be using a bending iron and a bending fixture with a thermal blanket in order to bend the sides. And it's going to be very difficult for me to do if I don't know what the temperature of everything is. We'll be working in temperatures upwards of 250 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So we need a temperature gauge to tell us what's going on and whether or not these bending fixtures are going to be hot enough to bend the sides. So a good temperature gauge is something that we're going to be using when we're working on building guitars. And also if you ever get to repairing guitars, you're going to need a temperature gauge when we remove fretboards and we do things like neck resets. So always good to have around. We also have another tool, which is a diamond surface file for filing the frets flat. We actually use something like this first to file the frets flat, and then we use our little file to put the half round shape back into the file. So this is also something that's very important to have. So this pretty much is what we're going to be using for specialized tools, hand tools, to put the guitar together. The last thing we're going to talk about are the power tools that we're going to be using. So we'll be right back. Well, traditionally, acoustic guitars are put together with hand tools. We're going to be using some power tools to get the job done. It's going to make it go quicker. It's going to increase your accuracy in what you're doing. And we don't need a whole bunch of things. One thing we are going to need is a laminate router. It doesn't have to be a big giant router, just a little tiny laminate router will do fine. And we're going to need a set of router cutters that have a bearing that are going to allow us to follow a pattern. Is going to be very important. So we have cutters like this with the bearing on the bottom, or we have cutters with the bearing on the top. We're going to be using both of these style router cutters in order to get the job done, because we're going to make a variety of patterns and use the router to actually help us cut the wood out quickly and precisely. So routers are going to be a big part of what we're going to be doing. We're also going to be using some form of sander. We're going to need some kind of orbital sander to allow us to smooth things out like the top and back very quickly. Although this is only going to rough it in for us. We're actually going to use just plain old-fashioned sanding blocks to put the final sand on the items we're going to be working on. I also have a very small 6-inch joiner that I use quite frequently. It's not a bad idea to have. They're not terribly expensive, but if you don't have it, you can do all the operations I'm going to be doing with it with a hand plane. Not a big deal. You're going to need a drill. Actually, you're going to need two drills. We're going to need a portable drill, and we're going to need a drill press. Now I'm going to be using an old-fashioned radial arm drill press that I got from my father-in-law, that I actually had to build my own guard for the V-belt on top because it's hanging out in the open. But the radial arm drill press is going to give me a lot more flexibility in drilling holes on an angle than a standard drill press will. But at any rate, you're going to need some sort of drill press, especially when we're working on the neck. We're also going to be using a table saw. Now, there are a lot of different varieties of 10-inch table saws. I'm going to be using a contractor's portable table saw because I don't need to cut large pieces of wood, and it's going to be good enough for what I'm going to use it for. However, if you've got a regular stationary table saw, that's fine. I'm going to be using a 14-inch bandsaw with a variety of different blades, and I'm going to be using a 10-inch bandsaw. And I'm also going to be using an old-fashioned jigsaw that I think Thomas Edison put this motor together. It's so old that I'm surprised it even works, but I do a lot of fine scroll work with it. So be it a new tool or an old tool, you can get a lot of mileage out of it as long as, again, the tools that you're using are sharp and they're in good shape. You shouldn't have a problem. And you don't need to go out and spend a ton of money on getting power tools to build a guitar. The next thing we're going to talk about are the plans that we're going to use to build a guitar. So we'll be right back. This section we're going to talk about the plans that we're going to use to build a guitar. Now, the plans that I'm going to use for this guitar are the plans that was for the 1937 Herman Hauser guitar. Now, this is one of Segovia's famous guitars that he loved to play. Herman Hauser apparently did a great job. This is currently in the New York Metropolitan Museum of History, and we're gonna follow the plans, sort of, and here's why. Herman Hauser did a lot of things the old-fashioned way. We're going to be taking advantage of some of his methods, but we're also going to do a little thinking of our own, and I'll explain that as we go along. Now, when you get a set of plans, you're going to notice that the plans are relatively transparent. If I hold them up, I can see through the plans. This allows me to take and put the plan down on the soundboard or on the back or the piece of wood I'm going to copy, and I can actually see what's going on, and I can actually take a pen and make marks. However, we're going to do something a little unique with the plans. The first thing that I want you to do with your plans is to take the set of plans, go to your nearest Staples or some place that has the ability to make copies for engineering drawings, full scale, and have them copy your plans twice. Make 2 full-size copies of your plans. Now at Staples, that's going to be about maybe $6 for both sets. It's not very expensive. They're going to be an exact duplicate of your plan. So that way I can take my original plan, I can put it aside so nothing's going to happen to it, and I take my copy, and now I'm going to be doing some things with a copy, and I can actually destroy this set of plans if I wanted to, which I will, and do some interesting things with it. Now we're going to need to make a pattern for the silhouette or the outside shape of the guitar. That's the first thing that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to make the pattern. We're going to need to mark off where the center line of the guitar is, and we're also going to need to mark off the center line of the hole, the sound hole, and the rosette channel. So here's one way to do it easily. Take your pattern, one set of patterns, cut it out roughly, well, maybe a ½ an inch from the edge, so it's still the shape. Take that, take some spray adhesive, spray it on, and glue it to a piece of particle board or a piece of very thin MDF. Once it's dried, you can actually put this in the bandsaw and just follow the line right around, and you have the outline of the guitar. That's the easiest way to do it. Another way to do it is make a half model. And what a half model is just simply take your plan, fold it in half because it's got a center line on it. Okay, like that. Cut it out, trace that on a piece of MDF, cut it out on a bandsaw, a jigsaw, a scroll saw, and from the half pattern, you can take that and make the full-size pattern on another piece of MDF. So we're going to be using thin pieces of particle board or thin pieces of MDF quite frequently in the process of making the guitar, because we have to make a lot of patterns. We've got to make patterns for the neck, we've got to make patterns for the front of the guitar and for the back of the guitar. So in this case, we also have a separate pattern or a separate map for the back of the guitar, which is going to show us the location of the braces. It's going to show us the location of the support wood that we're going to glue on the seam between the two back pieces. It's going to show us the location of the Spanish heel for the neck. It's going to show us the location of the end heel at the bottom of the guitar. It's going to give us information on thickness. This is in millimeters, and somebody had measured this. It ranges anywhere from 2.5 millimeters to 2.2 millimeters. It varies all over the place. We're going to pick a set thickness and work with it once we get going on our guitar. If we look at the plan for the top of the guitar, it gives us the sound hole information, the diameter, the information for the rosette. It gives us the location for the main transverse braces. It gives us the information not only in the length and positioning for the strut bracing, for the fan bracing, but it also gives us the height and width of each brace. We have our two bottom braces, or V braces, our end block. This guitar, the top was put together with not kerf wood but tentallones, and it gives us that information here, what a tentalone is and how it goes together. And we'll be talking about that when we start gluing up the top. Then, once we have our plans for the top, we also have the plans for the fingerboard. So we actually have the outline of the fingerboard. And the way to deal with this is cut it out, paste it on some MDF or thin particle board. After it dries, cut to the line with a bandsaw, and now we have not only the spacing for each one of the fret slots, but we also have the actual design and shape that we're going to use for the fingerboard. So when we cut the fingerboard out, we've got it all made. We also have a template for the headstock if you want to use his template for the headstock. We have some profiles listed at different fret positions as to the profile of the actual neck. We have the side view of the neck with the information for the tuner holes. We have the information for the slots. We have the information for the Spanish heel that we're going to work on. This information here on this particular plan was the information that Hauser used to actually make the rosette. He actually made the rosette out of little itsy bitsy pieces of wood. We're not going to do that. We're going to buy the finished rosette. We'd be there for a year. So this is going to be very important. Basically what we're going to do, in this case, I've taken a piece of wood and I've made it in the same shape of the fingerboard. This is going to help me setting up the neck, locating everything, and in general I'm going to use this pattern to cut out the fretboard. So when we're making a neck, one of the things that we're going to be doing is we've got to cut this outline out for what is called the Spanish heel. So on the plans, I can take a flat piece of MDF and I can actually outline what my Spanish heel is going to look like. Then, when I get ready to put it up there, and you're going to notice that my Spanish heel is quite different from this Spanish heel on this ready-made neck, ready-made guitar neck. So not all of the guitars are going to be the same. So ours is going to be a little bit differently. Because primarily when we make the neck, the heel ends up being the center point or the focal point of the entire guitar, and it becomes very important. So I'm going to be taking my pattern, and I'm going to be taking a couple of blocks of wood, and I'm going to be locating them at the end of the main piece of wood that is going to represent the neck, and I'm going to put my pattern on here after I've glued everything. I arrange these so it covers all the little angles. Okay. And so when I glue this up, I'm going to be able to then take the bandsaw and cut out the actual side view or side shape of this pattern. From there, then I'm going to have to take the neck, and I'm going to have to cut it out three-dimensionally. And for that, I'm going to use a saw, and I'm going to use a chisel. We're also going to have to cut this very important slot because the sides are going to fit into that slot. And we're going to do that with a handsaw. But we're also going to be using the pattern to locate that slot because that slot happens to be at the 12th fret. The 12th fret is going to align perfectly with the center of that slot. So we're going to be using the 12th fret to not only locate the sides, but locate the fingerboard, which is going to be very important. So patterns are going to be very, very useful to us. We're also going to be talking about not only making a pattern out of MDF, but we can also buy ready-made patterns. In this case, we are able to go to stumac.com or Luthier's Mercantile International, and we can buy a clear plexiglass pattern, which when I place on top of the Hauser guitar shape is exactly the same shape. It has the center spot for the holes. I can mark out the hole for the soundboard. I have the ability to take my pencil and mark off the edges where each fan brace goes and each transverse brace, the braces that go this way. And I can literally see where everything goes. Very handy pattern to have. They're about $30, $35, but if you're building a lot of guitars, it's worth it. But you can make your own out of MDF, so you don't have to go absolutely crazy. In the process of building a guitar, we can also make patterns like this on MDF where I've taken the plan, I've cut it out. In this case, I would cut out the slots also. I can then take this, put it against a piece of wood that I'm going to be using for the headstock, and using my router in my router table, I can follow that on the bearing and actually use the router to cut this out the same shape as the pattern. I actually stick this with two-way tape. We can take the entire neck, cut out the outline of the entire neck, which gives me the ability to look at it against the wood that I'm going to be using and actually try to visualize not only the position of everything on the neck, but also the angle of everything on the neck. Because if you look carefully at this one, while the fretboard is one angle, the slot where the slide or the point at which it attaches to the side is not 90 degrees. In fact, the neck ends up being on an angle. So this is obviously a steel string guitar. We don't have that problems on a classical guitar, but it's something that we need to think about when we build guitars. We can also take the main braces. We can also again cut the pattern out, glue it to a piece of MDF, trim it using a sander and a jigsaw, and we actually have now a pattern where we can lay on the brace material and cut it out exactly. It's going to save us a lot of labor. Another thing that we can do when it comes to pattern making is this pattern here. I actually took the headstock of a Gypsy Jazz classical guitar. I mounted the Gypsy Jazz guitar, took the tuners off, mounted it upside down, had somebody hold the end, and I traced the outline. Then I After I traced the outline, I cut out the slots, cut it to fit on the jigsaw, sanded it all down. Now I have a fixture to make my own headstock design based on a Selmer Gypsy Jazz classical guitar. I would take this, I would, using the center line that I've drawn on here very lightly, I would take it and I would stick it on the piece of wood I'm going to use for my headstock with 2-way tape, put it in a vise. It sticks on there very good. I then turn it upside down and I put it on my router table, and I can actually route this out to the same shape. It saves me a lot of time. It's very accurate, and it works very good. If you're doing a classical guitar, I stole this design off of a Yari guitar, the same way, and never throw away a guitar. This is a headstock from a guitar that had a bad split in it, so I just cut the headstock off. This, in fact, becomes my pattern for a headstock. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use patterns. The one more thing I wanted to talk about patterns is, eventually when we are making the neck, we're going to have to drill these holes, and they have to be drilled relatively perfect for the tuners. So what you can do, if you don't have the special tool that I have that's made out of metal and aligns the holes perfectly, if you take a headstock from a guitar that you don't want anymore, because all tuners basically have the same center holes. So a tuner off a Yamaha is going to fit another classical guitar. It's only rare instances when the guitar is made in Europe that you might find a tuner where the center lines are different than typical ones used in the United States. So if you take the headstock off a guitar that you don't want anymore and you split it in the middle like that, we now have a fixture that I can clamp there and use that as a guide on my drill press to drill the holes. Or I can take this and I can take a piece of hardwood and transfer the holes. In other words, put that on a piece of hardwood, drill it, and then cut the hardwood to fit, and now I've made a permanent fixture for drilling holes on the slot heads. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use templates. You can maximize this by getting the plans duplicated at some place like Staples, very inexpensive, gluing it to MDF or particle board, and then cutting it out with a bandsaw. Very handy way to go, and you'll see us work with it quite a bit as we go along.